So the assignment, how much is it worth? 45. 20% on the presentation, 25% on the written report, right? So, here's what I'm going to say about the written report. The written report can be due after the following weekend, all right? So what that means is, when you make your presentation in the class, I will make comments on the presentation. I'll make comments about the subject matter and your knowledge of the subject, and instead of having to hand in the report right away, you can take those comments as a learning experience and then hand it in several days later. So that gives you an advantage to learn something during the presentation. Now, the presentation skills and all the things related to that are linked on my website. I'm very strong about teaching students presentation skills. And when you're thinking about your presentation, don't worry so much about everything to do with the project. Just think about how you can make a really exciting, kick-ass presentation. Now let's talk about what you're going to make your presentation about. In groups of 3 or 4 or 5 if you want to, you're going to make a presentation about a Canadian company involved in foreign direct investment. Right? What that means is a Canadian company that went and bought something in another country, or acquired ownership of something, or set up a plant, or developed a joint venture, or a strategic alliance, or any of the other things that we have discussed in this course. You can, if you want to, use the same company you did for this assignment and just expand upon that and add to it with some of the things I have not yet taught you, like globalization of markets and brands and dumping and outsourcing and supply chain management. The assignment that you just handed in, I expect, will be based upon what I've taught you up to date. The assignment at the end of the project will include the entire range of everything I taught you in the course. So to some extent, it's almost like a diary of what I taught you. So tonight, for example, we're going to be talking about strategic alliances, collaborative relationships, and also some things to do with globalization of markets and brands. As I'm talking about these things, I want you to think about how you could work that into your project, meaning things about your company that you could discuss in that context. The other thing that would be very useful for your report is if you could relate it to an industry sector, so that in the beginning there would be some comment about what sector the company's involved in. If it's a mining company, something about the mining sector in general. If it's an automotive company, and so on. Some of you, by looking at the titles, had very interesting, weird topics for this 20% assignment. That's fine. I would suggest that you pick something boring but not very exciting for the final one, so that you could get through all the things that are required. So it doesn't have to be a really exciting, dynamic company. Just pick a company that you could find a lot of information about. Right? Now, don't do Magna, because too many people do Magna and it's been done to death. But something like that. You don't want to do the companies that we already discussed in class, so don't talk about Scotiabank in the Caribbean, and don't talk about Bank of Montreal in the United States, or TD Bank in northeastern United States. But you could talk about the TD Bank in Russia, or you could talk about the Royal Bank in Africa, or other things that I did mention in class. Right? In terms of working together in a group, one of the things that's useful is to divide up the work, and in the early part of the report, tell me, when I'm reading the table of contents, who did what and who's responsible for what. You've got, what, 3 weeks to do this assignment? 3.5 weeks or so? I think it's maybe even 4 weeks, depending on how you count on the calendar. One thing that would impress me is if you make contact with the company. There's no law that says you can't send an email to some of these people and ask them a question. For example, did so-and-so, who's the Vice President of Marketing, give a speech at a conference? Could you have a copy of that speech? You could go onto the website and check information about their press releases. Don't rely on just looking through the Toronto Star and the Globe Mail to see if you can find information about the company. Sometimes news topics about the company don't necessarily make the newspaper, but they would be on the company's website where it has press releases. If the company is not big enough to have a website on which there's press releases, then don't do that company. Do another one. Right? Remember, there's no final exam in this course. This is the big sort of kick at the can, and I expect a pretty good quality of work. Next class, I will bring to class some examples of what people did last year, so you can see some ideas. The other thing people may ask me is, how many pages? It's always one of them, how many pages? Does it have to be 10 pages? Well, let me give you an example of how you figure this out. It's 20% for the presentation, 25% for the written report, right? In your other courses in 3rd and 4th year, have you ever done an essay that was 25% of your mark? Anybody? Have you ever done one of those 20? 15? How many pages was the one that was 20%? On 20 pages. Anybody else do one? Alright, if you're doing a thesis for a course and it was 50% of your mark, you might have 50, 60, 70 pages. If it was something that was 10%, you might have 8 pages, 9 pages, 10 pages, 6 pages, somewhere in that range. So I'm not going to tell you a minimum or maximum, because some group might have 23 pages, another group might have 28 pages. What's the difference? The group that had 28 pages included 4 pages of emails between them and the Vice President of Marketing. Or they set up a little wiki spaces and it was exchange of their information back and forth. Or they put a little video on YouTube and 3 pages was the dialogue of their video on YouTube. So there's all kinds of things that can push up the page count. Or somebody typed it in, space and a half instead of single space. So I don't really worry about those things. I don't tell people it's got to be 20. Because as soon as you do that, they're going to change your margins from 1 inch to 1.5, and they got 20 pages. All right? Is there anything that you want to ask me about the report? Or anything that you could think of that you need to know? Basically, you are writing about the foreign direct investment activities of a Canadian company involved in something overseas. Now, in terms of how you arrange your information, you could do it any way you want. You could do it according to the influences in 6 environments. You could do it based on geographic locations. You could do it based on their activities in several different countries or just one country.